Thanks. Good evening, everybody. That was it's a hard act to follow right after Prasad and Sarah, the fun that they've had. It's not very often that, you sitting out in the audience and you're chuckling to yourself. But a couple of weeks back when Brand Equity reached out and they said, would you do this? And obviously for the love of being on stage and getting some free clicks and social listening, I said yes. And then then we got this leveraging social chatter to formulate real-time PR strategies. It was more a topic like, you're back in college and you have to write a 100-word composition. So I said, it's a bit of a no-brainer. I think everyone's doing it. But before we sort of leap in and explain what it is, how many people out there, in terms like a show of hands, whoever's left in the audience, actually, you're practicing social listening? I mean, as professionals, or are your teams, or are your organizations or agencies? I can see only one hand there, and I'll put my hand up too. That makes about 4 out of, okay, that's a bit of a weak stat, so maybe this would be a good conversation. So what exactly is social listening? And what, you could Google it and find out, but to me, before I kick off and invite Shreya on my right and Kiran on my left, is you're really finding out what are people talking about your brands or your product or you as a professional or an organization. And then you bring, it's not only monitoring, that's a part, but you're listening and you're responding or you react. To me as a professional, having worked across brands, that in a sense is social listening. Social Bakers has got some very interesting statistics. There are about 3.6 billion people who use social media. And that's going to hit 4.4 billion by 2025. Now, 51% of brands, and this is true for India, utilize social listening in any capacity. Now, we'll get into how does this really matter. Now, 54% of brands who actually respond to a customer query, and that's not a very positive stat, but if you do answer a customer query, they say your customer advocacy increases by 25%. And that means if you're a brand and you're responding online and saying, I'm going to sort your problem out, or this is it, that actually increases stickiness. I'm going to kick off with a question to Kiran, and I think we're going to sort of go back in time a bit, if that's fine. But what was the equivalent of, I know we were speaking in the speaker's lounge and said, let's take a set of questions and see if that's interesting, but what is the equivalent of social listening prior to the internet?
So, I think social listening has been around forever. And to my mind, the Amul girl is an enduring example of, listening. So I think the format may have changed. What happened several years ago or decades ago was you did it through market research, feet on street, and you had 24 hours to really sort of accumulate this listening. Today, what's happening is you can do it in the comfort of your drawing room, and you have 24 minutes. So the cycle has reduced from 24 hours to 24 minutes. But listening has been around, and I don't think brands can genuinely sort of exist without that. And I think the Amul girl, which has been around for decades, is a very enduring example of that listening.
That's a fantastic example that you have. I think when we were speaking, the other example that came about of social listening, and now if you're sort of looking at in the past, was R.K. Lakshman's The Common Man. Right? Every morning you saw a cartoon. I think cartoons also daily, I'm not sure if you agree, but exemplifies, or it is actually bringing what is happening in real life or situations, whether it's in Parliament or on the streets of India or wherever you are. I wanted to bring you in. Share the question is, you're in a brand, Puma, which is aspirational. How are you all engaging people? Is it, and we'll get into the crux of the question, but when it comes to social, what's your presence like?
Sure. So I think for us, we realized quite a while back that, the largest chunk of our audience is digital today, right? They are online. And like you said, 3.6 billion people are online. I think for us, digital is really our bread and butter. We've been perfecting this for years. And it's really where we go all out, right? And that's really where we talk to our audience, where we engage with them. And of course, we've been engaging offline for the longest time, right? We have a huge retail presence, but I think with the kind of visibility that you get to who your audience is and how they're responding to you, like Kiran said, in real time, I think nothing beats social, right? So I think if you are able to master that game and you're able to understand what your consumer wants to hear from you and what they engage with, I think there is huge value to be mined there.
There's a life cycle for any brand on social. And I'll bring this question to you first and then take it to Kiran. At what stage is it you have presence and you push content out and you monitor? Or are you picking in feedback? And could you give us an example, could the audience listen to an example of how Puma is actually responding or reacting to social chatter?
Sure. So I think first and foremost, honestly, I think a lot of people would look at social listening or social chatter as reactive. Either somebody saying something negative about what I've put out there and I need to respond, or the most, I think, common way of social listening, which is a bit of like customer support. People are putting their queries and questions and their anger out at you, and you're sort of solving that in real time, right? But I think there is a lot of value in social listening even before that it gets to that point, right? And I think you can really leverage it across the funnel, like pre, during, post purchase. There is a lot of scope to mine this, right? And maybe to make it a bit easier with an example, something that we had done last year, right? This was I think mid of last year, where the Zimbabwean cricketer Ryan Burl actually put out a tweet, right, saying that he's playing with torn shoes, right, and he needs help. And the team, of course, reached out to him in real time. We sent across a product, and overnight it became a huge story, right? And this wasn't something that was targeted towards us as a brand, right? So traditionally, it's not what a lot of people would call social listening. But I think, this is an example of when you exist in a certain ecosystem. For us in the sporting ecosystem, and you're keeping your eyes and ears out for what's happening, and you're reacting in real time to a situation where you feel you can step in and add value, right? So I think there is a lot of scope beyond just the traditional complaint, redressal, or negative reaction.
Kiran, I want to put that question to you. What we are hearing and what we are seeing is, if you want to talk to a brand faster, connect with it on social, it's the new call center.
One of the things.
And perhaps faster, because some brands have got that architecture in place. But that's not what we want to hear. I think an example, you've seen many years of this, you've got a huge bouquet of clients. How are your clients using social listening or social chatter differently? And at some unique example, if it could help us understand.
So, to my mind, it seems that for large brands, social seems like a no-brainer and social listening. But, here's how smaller brands can benefit. You get to learn a lot of conversations about industry. Who are the people talking about your industry? Can you look at competition and learn from them? Can you find a sweet spot where you can insert yourself and maybe find newer customers? I think whether you have 500 customers or 5 million, any brand can find value by social listening. So, one of the things that we do, for a very interesting example for one of the brands that we work with, it's a pre-owned car platform, and for them we do an annual report, which is a compilation of trends ascertained from their platform. They've got 30 million plus users, so gives us really rich data. So this year, 2019, it so happened that our finance minister talked about the fact that the millennial mindset was harming auto sales because millennials were preferring to use Ola and Uber. Our report was just getting ready, and our report found that millennials were driving the pre-owned car market. So, we connected the two, and we overnight sort of turned it around to ride on this moment. And this was really, I think, a great way of using chatter to build on our strategy. And it served us really well. It did very well, and it sort of, it served to drive a lot of hits.
Great example. So I think where we brought the conversation is brands on social today, tick.
Yes.
Brands need to listen, tick.
Yeah.
Brands are responding.
Yeah.
I think we've heard one example for Puma. You've given an example of the pre-owned car market. I do remember that story. I used to work at Ola at one point. So it was good news to say that people want to move to ride sharing, but then there's also a set of people who want to do the second car market in pre-owned. That's check. But there are a lot of brands, so they're doing all of that. What I want to now bring in is sort of evolve this conversation. And this is to you, Shreya. Now, when you get all of this information, who in your organization is consuming it and how? So what's the kind of information you require? You know, it's like a daily coverage report, right? So this is nothing better than a sales report so I think that's really and from there we'll take it.
Sure. So I think, today there are a bunch of tools that do exist that will cut and slice data that is available in various formats, right? I mean, I think the most obvious one is things like sentiment analysis, where you'll do a natural language processing and a bit of AI and prediction to sort of tell you, where your brand is, where it's being spoken about, what the sentiment is, right? And I think you can, like I said, you can slice and dice the data any way you want to really understand what it is as an organization that you can get value from. But I think there is also merit in people in the organization just having their ears to the ground and knowing what's happening, right? Because at one end, of course, you have structured data, but for people who are in the ecosystem, who are with your brand, to go out there and learn firsthand what's happening, what people are talking about, either about your brand or the partners and ambassadors that you collaborate with, or just the ecosystem that you exist in itself has a huge amount of value, right? So I think first and foremost, from your sources of data itself, it can be structured. You can have a bunch of tools that you can plug in and get the data that you want, but also having the right kind of people who actually have that context and background, going out there and coming back with information that's relevant is equally important, I think, to make sense of the data, right? Like you said, there is a lot of data, but really who is the right person to be going through that data and saying, hey, this is relevant for me as a brand, is equally critical to this process.
Okay. So data and information is critical. Kiran, what sort of data do you actually present to clients? Like, when do you do the social listening? At the end of a day or the beginning of the morning? What do they want to hear from you?
So I'm not so sure this is particularly a daily practice, but really what we are monitoring for is sentiment. Who's talking about your brand? What kind of conversations are getting the engagement? So, these, in real time and over time help you sort of decide how you may want to include them in your communication strategy. Also, monitoring and listening, to my mind, are two different things. Monitoring is more static, where you're seeing what's happening, but unless and until you're analyzing it and putting action behind it, which is the listening part. And I think also this listening has to then go back to the relevant departments within an organization. So be it customer service or product teams or marketing, unless it's rooted back and action is taken. There's a really simple example, about what is social monitoring and listening. So imagine you have a bookshop and you hear two people talking about the first person is saying, I love it here, and the other one says, I wish they had hot coffee. Now you overhear that and you make sure that you start to serve coffee and brownies. Now that's like a loop closed. So a lot of the times it stays at just monitoring. So how do you present all this data and how do you sort of analyze it is equally important, because otherwise I don't think anyone has the time and the bandwidth to look through reams and reams of what you can produce.
Fantastic example about I think that's also where the role of, I'm just wondering whether a data scientist comes in, who work with the social team, and you're reading through and understanding information. Cool. So I think all of that is quite understood, but if I'm sitting in the audience today and we haven't really put into the process of social listening, or it's at a very elementary level, and we're going to get back to you, is to understand what's the architecture do you have in place? Is it a set of, do you have a fancy lab? Is it a bunch of people sitting in front of a laptop? Is it freemium that you mentioned, software? So explain to us.
Sure. So I think for us, again, a couple of things, and I'm going to break it down into what we do as a sort of structured process and then what we do ad hoc, right? So I think we use this tool called Sprinkler, which we use for social listening and analysis, right? That's of course a global tool. And I do have people in my team who prepare weekly reports, right? On broadly what we're hearing out there, right? And it could be per post specific, it could be general sentiment on the platforms that we exist, and the idea is really to find the 2 or 3 big takeaways for us that week in terms of what we need to either fix, right? And it could be something as simple as, for example, we've just released a certain collection which we've ranged from global, and of that collection maybe we've ranged 5 products and not ranged 3, right? And in India, and you have a bunch of people commenting on that post saying, hey, we went to your website and we didn't actually see the other 3 products, when are you going to get them, right? So immediately what you do is you spring into action and you go back to the product teams and say, hey, when are we getting this? And if we don't have it, can we get it? Because clearly there's interest, right? So that's a structured part which you would do probably on a weekly basis. You need not do it on a weekly basis. For us, like I said, social is so critical, and that's where a majority of our communication happens, that weekly is needed, right? But for every organization, depending on what part of your strategy social forms, you can decide your cadence, right? And again, you can, a tool like Sprinkler again offers you various versions of what data you want to see and how you want to see it. So depending on what as an organization you want to optimize for, you can get any amounts of visualizations on your dashboard, right? You can have gender cuts, you can have per post cuts, you can have positive, negative sentiment, you can have any form of data that you think is relevant for you to go back internally and make decisions. But I think the second part for us, which is probably equally important, if not more, is just the team keeping a track of what's happening in the ecosystem, right? So it's as ad hoc as having an Instagram group or a WhatsApp group and constantly sending things that you're seeing in the ecosystem and saying, hey guys, this is sort of brewing in the ecosystem that I'm in, and we should either act on it if it's a great thing and you see a trend building, or let's be careful not to end up in that situation, right? Learn from what other people have done wrong as well and not do that. So I think for us, both are equally important, and I think having the right kind of people, right? So as a sports brand, for example, it's very important for us to have people who actually understand and watch sports across the board, know what's happening in the sporting industry, and come back and make sense of that and say, hey, you know what, today in the sporting ecosystem, here are the 3 things that are a huge issue and people are talking about it, and here is where we can step in and solve it, right? So I think both are equally important. We do both on a weekly basis, but like I said, your cadence is completely up to where social listening falls in your strategy and what you really want to get out of it.
Very interesting the way you explain it, but here's a follow-up question. To me, sitting here and listening, it seems that a large amount of your human capital resourcing goes into sort of monitoring this.
I would say no. Monitoring is done by tools. Understanding what that means for us as a brand and acting on it is still very much, I think, people in the team and the human element, because I think unless you have context, you don't know what to do with that information, right? These are great numbers to have, but what next? Who do you go to? How do you fix the problem? Is there a problem? Data will just give you numbers. Is there an issue to fix? Is there something that you can act on? Only the people in your team can really figure
When there's a problem, you bring in the consultant. So let's ask the consultant. When brands and businesses say that there's so much out there, we can do so much with social, it's an animal, we don't quite understand it. What is your advice to them?
Well, they're right. Well, it needs to be managed. You need to listen, you need to manage, you need to use that actively to formulate your communication. Absolutely. And, to Shweta's point, I think we do it the same way. It's manual as well as tools. I don't think you can do away with the manual listening. And we do both effectively today. Of course, the big time tools are expensive, but there are lots of plug and play tools that we use. There are a bunch out there. I don't think they're free over a period of time. They have free trials, but these tools are complex. And you need people to decipher that information intelligently to make it actionable. So it needs talent, and it needs the right kind of talent, and that is something which often is the challenge. So,
Talent is the issue. I think
and it's a 24/7 job as well.
cool. So I want to go back to the audience, just a show of hands, but how many of y'all are, and may seem as a bit of a no-brainer question, but how many out there are regularly, on a daily basis, checking in on social on your clients? Still not too many hands, not too many hands. Obviously, I think this is more than the first question. I think this is about a 60 to 70, which is not bad. I would have expected a lot more. More because today, if you really want to understand what's being said, you would Google, which is also social chatter. You would get into the search bar of Twitter to understand what's being said. There could be a certain hashtag, and you could just add to it as we speak. You could put a name, keywords, and then you sort of bring it up.
Google
Looking at
Trends is
competition.
great. Google Trends.
Google
is
Trends, yep.
Great.
It's
News.
also misspellings.
Yep.
You're also, yeah.
So I think I just want to quickly get an issue that you're faced. And then I think everyone, good news is we build on it. But an issue that each of y'all have faced, and you're through social listening, social chatter, you all have been able to sort of, maybe just an issue.
Well, one that I can think of a bit recently is, I don't know whether to call it an issue, but it's the one on the top of my mind. We used to have this feature on our website where we had something called a sneaker calendar, right? So it would essentially tell you what to look forward to in the next couple of months, right? And then, of course, the website went through an update, and this sort of got lost in the mix, right? And at some point, we had somebody with a significant amount of following sort of put out a stinker saying, "What's wrong with you guys? Why would you take that off?" right? And then they went on to their Instagram stories and did a poll, and we saw an alarming number of people who actually responded saying, "We missed that sneaker calendar. Why don't you have it? Get it back." So immediately we sort of went back and we said, "Hey, we have to have this. There's enough, and more people who are looking forward to it." So went back immediately. I think it took a couple of days, but we got it right back on, and then we sort of put it on our social saying, "Hey, it's back." But I think it's a great way for real-time resolution, right? Because with features like tagging and direct message, people are literally talking to you. They're telling you. You don't have to go out there and ask, right? You have that information ready. So it's great to respond to in real time.
Kiran?
So, one of the things, of course, and it's everyone is aware of it, crisis is today breaking on social. So if you're not vigilant and if you're not actively listening, you may miss it and miss the right amount of time to respond to it, because the expectation, since brands are on social, is to do it quickly. And if you take more time than what is expected, even if you do the right thing, sometimes the impact may not be there. So as a PR consulting firm, we are constantly on social, especially for clients who could be more crisis ridden, and making sure that are you able to gauge sentiments to maybe prevent a crisis. It's not always possible, but you are better prepared versus, it's like akin to prevention is better than cure. So social listening becomes extremely important in that case. So
Great. There you have it, from the best in the industry, that social prevention is better than cure. I think it's important that we practice. And with that, we're going to open it up to the audience. If there are any questions, else we can give 7 minutes back to all of us.
yes.
Do we have any questions coming in from the house? I think we have one coming all the way from the back of the room. So let's quickly take that.
At least someone was listening.
Hi, thanks. Good evening. Myself, Vinay Gupta. I'm from Trivon Content Services. We are a B2B content solutions provider. My question for the panel is, could you give an example in the B2B context where a brand has leveraged social listening effectively to kind of solve a problem in any function? It could be around communications, it could be around product. Good to hear your thoughts.
Statistics actually show that one of the biggest ways that brands, and especially B2B brands, are using social listening is to understand what users want in terms of features. Look at SaaS companies, for example. I think they're using social listening as a very effective tool to to offer newer products to consumers. In fact, that's top of the heap in terms of the value social listening can bring to you. So, so absolutely. And the second would be customer service, and also finding newer customers is happening this way. If you're, say for example, either you're learning from competition or trying to emulate them, or even when they trip up, it could be a great time to plug your brand in, regardless of whether you're B2B or B2C. So it's being used effectively by brands across.
Fantastic. Want to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, we're of course largely B2C, but we do sort of sell to platforms and other partners. And I think for us, where social listening sometimes helps a lot is in terms of external research, right? So you may go back to a partner and say, hey, you know, recent trends have told us that this particular category is on the rise, and let's do something to plug that gap, right? So you would actually use it as a way to sort of inform yourself on what's really working in the ecosystem, and then how do you really sort of work towards that on a partner platform.
Do we have any further questions here in the room? An observation. Are you ready for that, Carson?
Absolutely. Someone's listening.
Hi, very interesting conversation. But what I want to say is, because the panel is called Social Chatter, and we've got somebody sitting with Puma shoes, but the chatter is going to be about your shoes today. So that's what we need to look out for.
You know,
Then panel successful, I
so
should
when
say.
I said that, when I realized when leaving home that there are two beautiful women on the panel and no one's going to look, I said, you know what? I'm not wearing a mask. The first thing, that's what, so let's go for shoes. But thank you. That's the social chatter, all right.
I think we should get you into some Pumas soon.
Yeah, so I'll be like the poor footballer. You can, you know, send the Puma. But I'm largely, I run with Asics and wear Tigers.
I think you should take this offline.
I
I'll change
will.
your mind.